Today we'll come to the table again at the end. My purpose right now is to sort of frame the way in which we're going to come to the table. So let me start at the very, very beginning. In the beginning, when God created the first couple, he, more or less set them at a table. He said in the garden, "You are free to eat from anything in the garden except that." And wouldn't you know it, that was the one thing they wanted. You imagine God creating the first human beings, you and I, and he made us intentionally hungry and thirsty for things only God could provide. But there is somehow always nearby another source. So somewhere in between that which God allows and that which God forbids, in between permission and restraint, there is a tremendous amount of freedom, and yet we are by nature often drawn to the other. So if a tree were a table, you would say there is a table God allows, provides. You may eat from any tree, and there is a table that God forbids. You may not eat from that. Someone has noticed then that the first transgression in the world was eating. Eating from the wrong table. So the rest of the Old Testament is filled with stories where God comes again and again and again trying to reconcile people at a meal. Sometimes they recognize it, most times they don't. But every time you see a story in the Old Testament of God trying to reconcile with humanity and to get humanity to reconcile with each other, you notice somewhere nearby is food. Whether it's Abraham entertaining 3 mysterious visitors, where he says in Genesis 18, "Can I get you something to eat?" He doesn't know it, but those 3 are more than angels. Were they, in fact, the triune God himself? For one of them says when they leave, "Shall we tell him what we're about to do?" Or maybe it's the festival in the desert for which God says to Pharaoh, "Let my people go so they may hold a festival, a feastival to me in the desert." God seems to be walking always in a garden, looking for the sons and daughters of Adam, saying, "Where are you? Have you eaten from the wrong table?" There is the feast of Passover. There is the feast of new moons. There is the feast of Jubilee. There is manna in the desert. There is the meal between the widow and Elijah. There is Moses, Aaron, and the 70 elders coming up the mountain in Exodus 24 and sitting down and eating and drinking with God himself. There seems to be all the way through the Old Testament, God's movements come with the table. In fact, someone has said you can summarize the Old Testament in 3 sentences. God is among us, we're his people, let's eat. And in the New Testament, the same thing is true. Jesus is consistently moving in and out of meals, and he doesn't seem to care who he's eating with. And every time he eats with somebody, it's a form of welcoming them. He's creating fellowship again with people of the garden who were once hiding. He fills his parables with stories about feasts and banquets. And at the Last Supper in Luke 22, he says to his disciples just before he leaves, I have said these things, and I confer unto you a kingdom so that you may eat and drink at my Father's table with me. Let's eat. So it's no surprise when on that first Easter, the first day of a new creation, when God is making all things new, recreating the world like he did in Genesis, it's no surprise that he would do it with a table. The women run to the tomb in Luke 24. They find the tomb is empty. The angels say he is not here, he is risen. The women go back and tell the disciples. The apostles don't believe them. Two members from the community, now disappointed and confused, decide to leave the community and go home. And they're on the road to Emmaus, as we said last week, on their way away from the community, Jesus joins them and he meets them at a table. For it was while he took the bread, blessed it, broke it, and gave it to them, their eyes were opened and they recognized him as he vanished. Hang on, the word means to be made, to appear, to become. Their eyes were opened, they recognized him, and he appeared apart from their sight. Are you tracking, church? I'll put it in simpler terms. It's like in this moment, he swapped out himself for a meal. Right when they recognize him, he vanishes from their eyes and is now present in the table. And their eyes are opened. They are learning to see him through other things. So far, so good. This couple then turns and runs back to Jerusalem, all 7 miles. And when they get there, they find the 11 disciples with a few more people holed up in a room in fear for the Jews. And Jesus suddenly appears in their circle. And right here, if you want to get the hang of this, you have to read yourself into this story. I mean, you have to say that in this moment, Jesus is appearing not simply to 11 disciples, he is appearing to us. This is not a story then about just the first community. This is a story about us. What I'm telling you is, if you learn to see stories like this as not only real, but normative, they are normative of the way Jesus moves in and out of the company of his people, then you are free to say, wait a minute, maybe here this morning at the end of April at College Wesleyan, Christ himself has come and he's standing among us. This is suddenly not about them anymore. This is about us. People, you have no reason to care why this happened to them if it's not happening to us. And he says to us this morning, be at peace. Wow. And they're terrified. And then he says, why are you so afraid? And why do doubts arise in your heart? And right here, you start to wonder, is there a better description of the 21st century church in America than that? Why are you so afraid? And why do you have so many doubts in your hearts? These two emotions, fear and doubt, are the two prominent responses of Jesus' disciples, not only in that day, but in our day today. And these are not just emotions, people. These are dispositions. These are predispositions. These are the way we, the Church of Christ, present ourselves to the world. It seems we are constantly afraid and constantly filled with doubt. If you think about things people do when they're afraid and compare it to the way the church is behaving today in the public, you see a striking similarity, don't you? When some people are afraid, they withdraw, they avoid confrontation. But other people get loud and belligerent. They puff themselves up. They over-exaggerate their importance. Some people draw lines and boundaries, either or, because they're afraid of losing something. Some people dial up the argument. They take it from 0 to 60 in a sentence or two because they know in their minds, the more questions he asks me and the longer this conversation goes, my chances of winning this argument go down. And so I need to end this as quickly as possible. And so we dial up the rhetoric. We start launching certainties about things we are not certain about, hoping that the other person will either cave in or leave. We are not built for dialogue in America. In fact, I wonder how much of what passes for conviction or certainty, or manners is really fear. Why are you afraid of being marginalized? Why are you afraid of scorn? Why are you afraid about losing promotions, about losing your reputation? And doubt, I don't believe the doubt is in their intellect. In fact, I know it's not. What he said is, why do you doubt in your heart? This is not an emotion. This is a disposition. And then it says, in their joy, they were disbelieving. And you wonder, how can you be happy about something you don't believe? And if you believe it, then why do you doubt? Well, the only answer I can come up with is that it's a wound from an old scar. It's a scar from an old wound. It's an old, unfinished, unresolved argument with God. We had hoped he was the one. But, and so they want this more than anything in the world, and that's exactly the trouble. They want it so much that to risk it being true and then to discover it is not true would wreck them. And so their doubt is the insurance policy they take out against the fear of even greater loss. We had our hopes up, and it turns out we were wrong. And so I wonder how many of us this morning sort of hedge our bets against something God has said. Yes, we believe in the words of God. We believe in those promises. But just in case, I'm going to pray that God will do this miracle, but He hasn't a few times, and so I can't fully invest in that, because if I do and I'm disappointed again, I risk everything and it's gone. And so the moment we want to lean in, we pull back. We want to believe, we can't. And Jesus' word to these people is not, you need to repent. He graciously, subtly walks them to a table. He says, look at me. A ghost does not have what you see I have. And they still can't believe. And then he says, do you have something to eat? There it is again. Let's eat. Right in the middle of all of the fear and the doubt, what they get is not a better argument. He says, let's eat. Do you have anything to eat? He says. And they hand him a piece of baked fish, which means they were already eating. You don't just have baked fish lying around in the first century, they're in the fridge. He more than likely interrupts their meal and says, does a ghost have this? Do you have anything to eat? I know you do. And they hand him a piece of baked fish, and he eats it. Wait for it. In their presence. Their table has become his. Then, from the table, Jesus sends them. Please don't miss this. Matthew says he commissioned them from a mountain. Mark says he commissioned them at the tomb. But Luke says, no. It all happened at the table. For it was right after Jesus ate the baked fish, he turned to the disciples who are still afraid and they're still full of doubts. He turns to those disciples, the two worst ways to start a movement. He turns to them, the least likely to succeed, and he says, was it not written that all of these things had to happen, that the Messiah, the King of the world, the Anointed One must suffer, and he must rise from the dead on the third day, and that repentance and forgiveness would be preached in his name to all nations, beginning here in Jerusalem. And then he says to them, these people full of fear and full of doubt, you are my witnesses. You? And this is where he finds you this morning. And I think there is a lot of fear in this room. You won't call it that, but that's what a lot of it is. 3/4 of us are having less spiritual conversations than we were 5 years ago. Did we just run out of things to say, or has it gotten harder? Almost half of the millennials, 47% be exact, believe that it is wrong to evangelize another person. I didn't say it was hard. I didn't say it was awkward. They said it was wrong. One called it a form of intellectual terror. It is in the teeth of that, Jesus says, you are my witnesses. You're full of fear. What happens if? And you're full of doubt. How do I know? Then how can you explain the last time? And so it is to you this morning and not somebody else that Jesus says, let's eat. The answer to your question is not a better argument. It is an act. It's a table. So whatever you carry with you into this room, whatever you think is wrong, whatever you can't solve, whatever unanswered prayer is still hanging in limbo, yes, hold it, don't deny it, bring it with you, but let's eat. And when you leave the table, you leave not just satisfied, you leave sent into the places where you live, work, and play. Every place in this world that you bring justice, whether great or small, you proclaim the gospel in that act. When you sit with a child who is underdeveloped and unseen in their home, and you remind them that they belong to Jesus, they can come to him. You bear witness of the gospel. When you pray with someone who cannot pray because they're trapped in doubt, and you talk to God as if he were actually there, you behave as if Christ is present in this world. You proclaim the gospel. When you sit with someone who is dying, losing their faith, the one they had their whole lives, and you remind them that their faith is on Christ, it is not on themselves. They were never, in fact, good enough. It was always Christ who did this. You proclaim the gospel. We have to get out of this mindset that says proclaiming the gospel is something you do to sinners. It is not. The people of God need to be convinced of the same gospel. It would shock you what we forget. So every time you sit with the powerless, suffering under the corruption of some leader who has overreached yet again, and you remind them subtly that this is your Father's world, and that while others may be in charge, God alone is in control. You bear the gospel. Church, wherever you go, be fearless. You don't need to be loud. You don't need to dial it up. You don't even need to be fully convinced. You'll be surprised where God will meet you if you just go.